I'm Lieutenant General Raj Shukla, General Officer Commanding in Chief, Army Training Command. Friends, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, a very good evening. It's a great pleasure to be back at the Chandigarh Military Lit Fest and to be speaking on the leadership attributes of two of our most outstanding soldiers, gentlemen who played a critical role in the scripting of our glorious triumph in 1971. Leaders extraordinaire, Field Marshal Sam Manekshaw and Lieutenant General Sagat Singh. I shall refer to them hereafter as Sam and Sagat, not on account of any deliberate impropriety or because I wish to take any liberties, but merely in order to save time and out of deep affection for those two gallant soldiers. My gratitude to the organizers of the Lit Fest for both the opportunity and the invite. Well, let me begin by stating that the pantheon of Indian military leadership is wide, varied, and very rich. In terms of sheer repertoire and as a crucible of extraordinary talent. The conflict of 1971 itself saw exceptionalism of various hues, from tales of raw courage and sheer valor to those of stoic bravery, grit and glory, camaraderie, great stories of soldierly honor and chivalry, sophisticated combat skills, sound strategic planning, and deep institutional resolves. There are many heroes of 1971, Lance Naik Albert Ekar, Flying Officer Nirmaljit Singh Sekhon, Major Hoshiar Singh, Second Lieutenant Arun Khetrapal, Lieutenant General Hanuj Singh, Brigadier Kuldeep Singh Chandpuri, Lieutenant General JFR Jacob, Lieutenant General Inder Gill, Lieutenant General Jamjit Singh Arora, the Chief of the Naval Staff Admiral S.M. Nanda, Air Chief Marshal P.C. Lal, scores of other soldiers, sailors and airmen that distinguished themselves in diverse roles, domains and battles. In the Battle of Basantar, the Battle of Longewala, the Tangail airdrop, the establishment of the heli bridge across River Meghna, and Operation Trident, the bombing of Karachi, being some of the more prominent battles. The statecraft of the political leadership of the day and the skills of the diplomatic corps, as also the wider bureaucracy, were equally salient. But the contribution of the Manekshaw-Sagat Jugalbandi, if I may describe the relationship as such, to the 1971 victory and the larger cause of India's national security is indeed profound. So that is the focus of my talk today, the burden of my song. We shall reflect upon the combat personas of the two generals, their quaint relationship, and their rather unique collaboration. Why together, in my humble view, they symbolize the gold standard in Indian military leadership. That is what we'll be talking about today. Allow me to begin with Sam Manekshaw, the iconic Sam Manekshaw, a great institution builder and the architect of India's greatest and most comprehensive military victory in modern times. When asked to enunciate the traits of a good military leader, did not parrot virtues like hard work, sincerity, resoluteness, loyalty, uprightness, etc. Important though these attributes are, but had this rather perplexing comment to make on military leadership. He who neither drinks, he said, nor smokes, nor dances, nor philanders. He who preaches and even occasionally practices piety, temperance, and celibacy could be a saint or a Mahatma, or more likely a humbug, but he certainly won't make a good military leader, or for that matter, a good soldier. So was the Field Marshal espousing the cause of smoking, drinking, and philandering? Unlikely. Was he being flippant? No. In his characteristic manner, the Field Marshal was outlining a philosophical outlook for combat leadership, to which an outgoing, carefree, devil-may-care attitude, a certain vigor, dash, elan, is also an irreverential, questioning demeanor was central. Certainly more germane than a saintly, preachy, straight and narrow, rule-bound manner which he described as humble. Now such a visage, however, was just one small part of the larger Manekshaw magic, whose great substantiveness and gravitas somehow tends to get masked, lost in the flamboyance of his public demeanor. This is something that I must underline because it is important, even critical to the understanding of Manekshaw, the man, his life, and his times. If you do not understand Sam Manekshaw's very substantive contributions to Indian defense and national security, You will come up with unfortunate conclusions, as Ambassador Chandrasekhar Dasgupta does in his recent book, India and the Bangladesh Liberation War, where he undermines Manekshaw's substantive role in helping Prime Minister Indira Gandhi arrive at the right moment for conflict initiation in 1971. Not a hurried launch, but one that was professionally planned and carefully orchestrated. That is very far from the truth, as we shall soon see. The racketeering that Mr. Dasgupta also refers to was merely the icing on the Manekshaw cake. The cake itself was both tasty and nutritious. What some believed to be racketeering was in fact an outcome of Manekshaw's self-effacing manner, whereby he tended to make light of even very weighty issues with some witty, chatty banter. In reality, however, at the heart of Sam's persona lay a prodigious capacity for hard work. Yes, hard work. Great equity, intelligence, wisdom, what we call vivek in Hindi, incisiveness, a great eye for detail, an acute sense of right and wrong, tremendous energy, ready wit and humor, as also extraordinary gallantry. In 1942, he saw action in Burma in the Battle of the Satang Ridge, where he took 9 bullets in the lung, liver and kidneys and was awarded the Military Cross for Gallantry. The Military Cross for Gallantry. The Australian surgeon whom Sam was brought to declined to operate on him, citing little chance of survival. He asked Sam as to what had happened. "A bloody mule kicked me," said Sam. "By Jove, you have a sense of humor. You deserve to be saved," replied the surgeon. He went on to operate, removing much of Sam's intestines. Later, Sam's father wrote to him, "Son, if you smoke or drink, you are finished." Sam told a friend a couple of months later, "Well, I did exactly that. I drank and I smoked, and so I survived." Many years later, Sam was asked to recount as to how he got the Military Cross. Lesser mortals, if asked the same question, would likely have adopted a pompous tone and recalled at great lengths the details of their bravery, fearlessness, and valor. Not Sam, who responded with typical self-effacing wit. "Oh, we walked into a bloody ambush," he said. "The buggers pumped 9 bullets into me and I fell unconscious. They thought I wouldn't live, so they gave me the Military Cross. I lived and became the famous Sam Manekshaw Military Cross." Please also consider carefully, is this glib racketeering or self-effacing wit? Should this in any way subtract from Sam's proven gallantry? I leave it to your better judgment. Such incidents also reveal certain traits of military leadership which Sam would go on to refine, perfect, and use with great effect in the years to come. Profound substantiveness in terms of the needs relevant to the phase in his professional life. Bravery, gallantry in the initial years, and deep professional competence later, always laced with great pluck, dash, and self-effacedness. Sam bore his successes lightly and underplayed his achievements, always under-promising, constantly over-delivering, and often making light of his phenomenal successes. He would make the most of opportunities, using his ready wit and presence of mind to charm his opponents and surmount the greatest of obstacles. Realizing very early that life was essentially a close shave, risk-taking became an essential arrow in his quiver, replicated many years later in the supposed face-off with Prime Minister Indira Gandhi over conflict initiation in 1971. There was a thin line, he would recall, between dismissal and becoming a field marshal. He was a great leader, even in times of acute adversity. Sam had a very strong sense of self-esteem, deep convictions, great impatience with red tape, the ability to move from failure to failure without loss of enthusiasm, a penchant for real combat. In his own words, the Chinese came to his rescue in 1962, he said, to resurrect a career in relative oblivion at Staff College. These were some of the standout attributes in his persona. Apart from being a skilled communicator, Sam also displayed great persistent charm and resolve. He was the CDS in 1971, not de jure but de facto, since no one was formally appointed, merely because of his ability to carry the 3 services and the formidable Delhi bureaucracy with him, integrate defense policy and plans, as also achieve remarkable strategic military synergy. He was able to marshal the concept of sovereignty in determined pursuit of national interest, despite formidable opposition from the USA. We all know about the threatening maneuvers of the 7th Fleet in the Bay of Bengal and China, which made some very disconcerting moves along the border, while concurrently displaying great ability to lead and inspire in the field, visiting troops on the ground, checking on their needs, raising their morale, etc., etc. He was as skilled in the affairs of Delhi as he was adept in the field. Sam was always substance over style. He, however, created and crafted a style which enabled his great substantiveness to flourish quite effortlessly. Great guts, a phenomenal risk-taking ability, and considerable powers of persuasion. These were some of the more remarkable qualities that define Sam as a man, a soldier, and the general and field marshal we all came to know. He had a great sense of right and wrong. I'll recall to you an episode from the Ministry of Defense when one day he walks into a room on the heels of the then Defense Secretary Harish Sareen. And he hears and sees Harish Sareen telling a colonel, "You there, will you please open those curtains?" And Sam, in his typical loud voice, said, "You sit down." And when Mr. Harish Sareen was trying to offer an apology and saying that he didn't actually mean to be rude, Sam Manekshaw said, "I don't care what you meant, I heard what you said, and I didn't like it." And this was his great sense of right and wrong. This was Sam the man. But his ability to speak truth to power, sometimes controversially so, was a typical characteristic of Sam Manekshaw. After 71, a journalist once asked a question on the Indian Army's patriotism and nationalism, and Sam said that the Indian Army Jawan fights for his battalion, for his regiment, and not necessarily for the nation. It may have been a trifle indiscreet, but it revealed his great faith in the strengths of our regimental system, which we all know is a wonderful nursery for training, for shaping of our ethos, and therefore our operational preparedness. So Sam never held back his punches. He always spoke out openly about what he thought was right. Sam created and practiced a unique brand of leadership, in my view, imbued in the Indian genius, tailored to the unique circumstance. He articulated and practiced an urbane form of military leadership, a self-created construct based on original application of mind, entirely original. And that is why I say leadership cannot be taught. A great sense of self-belief, a very clairvoyant view of the military's role in defense. He was always pragmatic. No humbug, that was simply not the man. Never preachy, but he had a style that exuded a certain majesty, both in deportment and action. He had a very elevated view and a refined sense of politicality. When asked as to whether the Indian Army was apolitical or not, he said, "Well, we are deeply politically conscious, but consciously not politically committed." If you reflect on this very statement, it is a very, shall I say, elevated view, because it says that, of course, we understand politics, but we've taken a conscious decision not to commit ourselves to any political leaning. So he was a man who had a deep understanding of the prevalent politico-military realities, and he was always rooted in the real world. The question is also asked, is Sam revered as a military leader because he was so successful? Or did the alchemy of leadership attributes in his persona lead to his great success? We could think about it, but in my view, I suspect it is the latter. He was indeed a remarkably astute military strategic leader, somebody who wore his considerable talent, wisdom, and capacity lightly. He was flamboyant, yet self-effacingly humble, unsparingly frank and fearless. He never succumbed, and please note, never succumbed either to the pull of political correctness or to the push of conventional wisdom. Sam was always original. He was never a good boy to the politico-bureaucratic complex, but he was invaluable to the nation's security interests. In the process, he created a genre and brand of his own. Now, what are the lessons from the Manekshaw phenomenon? Well, I think he practiced in the military profession a mantra that is very close to what in the corporate world we say differentiate or die, because his leadership always exuded a certain uniqueness. There was never a leader like Sam before him, and there will never be a leader like Sam after. So when we remember Sam and recall his great contributions and worth, we may like to emulate not the overt flamboyance which was a typical characteristic of Sam, but the more latent substantiveness. That is what we must capture from Sam and tailor it to our own unique genius while leveraging the same for organizational betterment and growth, as Sam Manekshaw so assiduously did. Let us now turn to that other lodestar of the Indian military, Sagat Singh, who rivals Manekshaw, but in distinctly different ways. For when it comes to what in Hindi they call Yudh Kaushal, combat leadership, combat genius, or sheer talent for war, as the biographer of General Sagat Singh, Major General Randhir Singh, so eloquently puts it, when it comes to sheer talent for war, there is none as remarkable and fascinating as General Sagat Singh. Sagat is of course a combat legend. His exploits are an intrinsic part of Indian military folklore, but there are a few other compelling reasons which makes General Sagat stand out, far above the rest in terms of combat accomplishments. In war, like in any two-sided match, it is said that the odds of winning or losing are equal. But Sagat beat all odds because he won each time that he fought, from the campaign to liberate Goa in 1961 to the fight back in Nathula in 1967, the Mizo insurgency thereafter, and of course the crowning glory in 1971, while spearheading the dash of 4 Corps to Dhaka. Sagat was always the unyielding commander, willing to fight wars uncompromisingly and always to a victorious end. Indian military history, tradition and lore has somehow tended to emphasize valor over victory. So right from Porus to Prithviraj Chauhan to Maharana Pratap to even Rani Lakshmi Bai, they were all valorous, but they all unfortunately lost their battles. Not Sagat. He was the eternal victor. He always won. He was valorous and victorious. Veer or Vijay. The winning streak was always his because he understood very early in his combat career, unlike many before him, कि जंग जो है वो असूलों की लड़ाई नहीं है, बल्कि जंग का एक ही असूल है, जीत. Somewhat in the manner of General Patton, who in a different strategic context asserted that you don't win wars by dying for your country, but by making the other, and he used a certain expletive which I won't, by making the other dash die for his country. Sagat's achievements in war also won him a great deal of international acclaim. They have stirred comparisons with stellar campaigns and combat legends of great renown. London's Sunday Times, for example, in its edition of 12th December 1971, had this to say about the dash to Dhaka, in which General Sagat's 4 Corps played a lead role. It took only 12 days, said the editorial, for the Indian Army to smash its way to Dhaka, an achievement reminiscent of the German blitzkrieg across Poland and France in 1940. The strategy, the editorial said, and the characteristics were the same: speed, ferocity, and flexibility. Now, the blitzkrieg, as any student of warfare will tell you, was a path-breaking style of military maneuvers predicated on speed, mass, envelopment, and smart technological leveraging that the Germans mastered through their offensives across Western Europe. That Sagat could orchestrate similar combat metrics and operational finesse in the dash to Dhaka speaks volumes of the combat genius of the man. Those of us in olive greens know that the Indian Army spends a great deal of time, often a lifetime, discussing operational art, its purpose, its deeper nuances, the many theories and associated tenets. I doubt if General Sagat ever delivered a talk on the subject. Always the doer, he merely practiced it. In 1971, in the dash to Dhaka, with consummate ease and unprecedented success. Little wonder, therefore, that Major General V.K. Singh, in his book Leadership in the Indian Army, Biographies of 12 Soldiers, compares General Sagat once again with the legendary American General George Patton that I just spoke about. Now, is such comparison justified? For after all, Eisenhower described Patton as a master of fast and overwhelming pursuit. He is also the finest leader in military pursuit that the United States Army has ever known. So it's a very tall proposition by way of comparison indeed. But how relevant is the comparison? Well, well-known historian and commentator, American historian and commentator, Thomas Ricks tells us that Patton excelled in the singular task of military pursuit, no doubt, but he was hounding a fatigued, retreating enemy. Sagat's dash to Dhaka, on the other hand, was not only superior in design, but also far more difficult to execute and therefore gritty. The logistical orchestration of 4 corps from Tezpur to Agartala was as much an uphill task as the many operational difficulties and challenges that followed. There were a series of riverine enclaves, impossible terrain, all against a dogged and entrenched enemy unwilling to yield ground. It was not that the Pak army in East Pakistan crumbled at the very onset. General Niazi is now, of course, known as the man who helmed the humiliating Pakistani surrender at Dhaka. But what we forget is that Niazi had done exceptionally well in the Battle of Chavanda in 1965, where he was awarded the Hilal-e-Jurrat. He was an incredibly ambitious general as also a gallant soldier, certainly not a pushover. So the adversary enterprise, the Pak enterprise in East Pakistan, was formidable indeed. The Battle of Dhalai, for instance, to break the crust of the Pakistani defences in East Pakistan, was a grim and bloody encounter in which Sagat suffered many adversities. It was characterized by a series of debacles. There were 6 scrappy failed attacks, several bloody operations. It saw the sacking of numerous commanders. Sagat himself was desolate. At one time he thought that he might not break the crust, let alone get to Dhaka. It took great grit and combat resolve to break the crust and progress operations thereafter. Sagat, therefore, in my view, because he had to overcome far greater operational adversity, was the more complete general and a more adroit practitioner of maneuver warfare. Greater, arguably so, than even the legendary George Patton. Now that is saying a lot. In the Indian landscape, he is definitely unmatched. Globally, he compares favorably with the best in the business. That is what makes Sagat such a great combat icon. Interestingly, how would General Sagat compare or relate with that other dominant military persona of those times, the man we just discussed, Field Marshal Sam Manekshaw? There may be no firm empirical evidence, but my own historical inference is that in some ways the duo enjoyed a strong mentor-mentee relationship. Through all of Sagat's journeys through Nathula, the Mizo insurgency and the race to Dhaka, Sam was his mentor. And in other ways, they complemented each other, even though they were diverse personalities. They complemented each other wonderfully to the collective good of Indian defense. We were lucky to have both Sam and Sagat in those critical apex positions in our military hierarchy, and the nation was bracing up to some of the most formidable challenges in its history. They proved not only equal to the task, but they were transformative actors in India's national security frame. The leadership of Sam and Sagat must not be viewed in narrow silos, but by the manner in which their differing attributes and virtues coalesced and came together in the service of national security. It was the great Jugalbandi that I spoke about that enabled the Indian nation not only to register one of its most comprehensive military triumphs against our Western adversary, but also regain in significant ways its lost strategic advantage vis-à-vis the northern adversary. Take India's victory of 1971, for instance. Sagat and Sam operated in different domains. Manekshaw in the strategic military realm. He was the CDS that, as I said, India never had, influencing the larger questions of war and peace, the political-military equations, conflict initiation, in synergizing the Delhi bureaucracies. Interestingly, he enjoyed wonderful relationships with the top bureaucrats of those times, P.N. Haksar, T.N. Kaul, D.P. Dhar, P.N. Dhar, and L.P. Singh. Sam's way with the media, his charisma, his energy, and contagious enthusiasm galvanized the entire war effort of the nation. But honestly, what would all of that have come to without Sagat's adeptness at the military hardball? His facility with the nuts and bolts of delivery in the field, Because do remember that as GOC-4 Corps, Sagat was the architect of the only decisive corps-level campaign in India's post-independence history, one that led to the surrender of over 90,000 Pakistani soldiers and to the birth of a new independent nation of over 100 million people. Or let me put it even more plainly. If there had been no Sagat Singh, there would have been no Dhaka and possibly no Bangladesh. That then is the measure of the duo's operational heft in the larger trajectory of South Asia's geopolitical destiny. Not insignificant in any way, both with regard to the military metrics and the larger strategic outcomes. Sample this. The dash to Dhaka involved a grueling military traverse of more than 650 kilometers over 12 days across very challenging terrain, quite a feat by itself. Yet it was accomplished. It was the greatest military victory that India has seen in over 2,000 years. Also leading to the biggest mass surrender of troops since World War II, 93,000 POWs. You can't change your neighbors, goes an old diplomatic adage. We all hear of it very often. 1971 proved that you can change your neighbor. A new nation state was created by the deft use of the instrument of force in an era dominated by the narrative and reality of the Cold War, nuclear deterrence, balance of terror, etc., etc. Whence it was widely believed that all military conflicts would end in stalemates. That's what makes the Bangladesh campaign so different, so salient, so significant, especially because it led to a very decisive outcome. In hindsight, it also helped the Bangla people escape from the clutches of their older sibling, a failing state and an obscurantist ideology, enabling the nation created in consequence, Bangladesh, metamorphosed into the economic miracle that it is today. Professor Ishrat Hussain, Pakistan's foremost economist, tells us that Bangladesh, once dubbed as a basket case by Henry Kissinger, today its national income has grown 50 times, its per capita income has grown 25 times. Its exports have grown 100 times and poverty levels in Bangladesh today are down to 20% from 60% in 1990. Truly Sonar Bangla. The military campaign to liberate Bangladesh, therefore, was truly a momentous event, an unparalleled act of physical and economic liberation, made possible, of course, by an overarching and very wise Indian grand strategy, the calibrated use of every instrument of national power, political, diplomatic, economic, strategic and military, one in which there were many actors, yet the contributions of Sam Manekshaw and Sagat Singh, for reasons that I have stated, stand out. The Jugalbandi, in fact, predates the 1971 finale, the final star, as some would say, by a decade, with the duo contributing critically and in substantive measure to an even greater cause, the strategic rejuvenation of a defeated, humiliated, desolate Indian army along the Himalayan borders in the wake of the 1962 debacle against China. Look at this. Then, 1962, Lieutenant General Sam Manekshaw is rushed on promotion from the academic environs of Wellington to head the 4th Corps in Tejpur, a ghost town after the Chinese offensive. Immediately on assuming command, in order to restore confidence, he gives orders for troops to advance and reoccupy the positions that they had lost up on the LAC, with his famous orders to his commanders and officers. "Gentlemen, I have arrived," he said. "Henceforth there will be no withdrawals." Soon after, within a week actually, Sam is visited in his headquarters by Prime Minister Nehru, Indira Gandhi, then a nobody in government, but after all Nehru's daughter, and General J.N. Chaudhary, the Chief of Army Staff. When Nehru is briefed about plans to reoccupy posts along the LAC, he reacts strongly, saying that he wants no more provocations, no further hostilities, and certainly no more soldiers killed. Sam, however, sticks to his guns and says that he either be allowed to command the corps the way he deems fit, or he would be happy to go back to Wellington. It is Indira Gandhi, ironically, who comes to Sam's rescue, telling her father that at a time when most generals were fleeing, here was someone willing to stand up and fight, and that he, Sam, deserved the government's full support, thus allowing Sam Manekshaw to set the tone and tenor off, take the first baby steps and lay the conceptual frame for the Indian Army's confidence building and renewal vis-a-vis our northern adversary. It was also here notably that the tempestuous but productive relationship between Sam and our Prime Minister in later years, Srimati Indira Gandhi, would take root and grow ultimately into one of great mutual respect, trust, even admiration. But it was Sagat yet again in Nathula in 1966-67 who would give flesh and form to the conceptual frame of strategic rejuvenation against the Chinese by demonstrating to his troops and the wider nation through a series of bold actions in Nathula that the Chinese were not in fact 9 feet tall, laying the incremental basis for later developments and events such as Sumandrong Chu, exercises Checkerboard and Divine Matrix, the raising of the Mountain Strike Corps, and most recently the demonstration of great operational resolve in Doklam and Galwan. The complementary effect of the military personas of Sam Manekshaw and Sagat Singh in forging a strategic dynamic that gave India one of its most comprehensive victories against the Western adversary in all of our history, while concurrently scripting the basis for our strategic military rejuvenation against China, is possibly the most seminal contribution of the duo, Sam and Sagat, to the fortification of our national security posture, a fact which in my view is not adequately appreciated. The other point that I would like to emphasize about the leadership and personas of Sam and Sagat is their great value in busting some commonly held myths about the military. The common view, for example, that the military is somewhat dull, dour and straitjacketed, that it encourages sheep that slavishly follow rules. For Sagat and Sam, like many other astute military professionals, were no sheep. They were in fact free-thinking goats, always unconventional, imaginative, creative, and very innovative. Far from slavishly following rules, Sam and Sagat, somewhat in the manner of Lord Krishna, often bent rules, skirted them, sometimes went on to buck and defy them, while always staying true to the larger principle of dharma. Not because they intended to be churlishly cocky, but on the contrary because they were deeply substantive. गंभीर थे वो दोनों, बड़ा ठहराव था उनके चरित्र में. It would be a mistake to dub Sam as merely flamboyant or Sagat as rash or obstinate. They both were determined and resolute in pursuit of the larger cause, qualities rooted in deep combat insights and driven by a rare amalgam of intellect and moral courage. This, in my humble view, is a profound commentary on the higher order leadership attributes that were central to Field Marshal Manekshaw's and General Sagat's personas. So if the larger strategic good demanded, as in the Nathula crisis of 1966-67, that the watershed be held at Nathula, Sagat made sure it was held at all costs, even though the formation plans allowed him to fall back to the comfort of the main defenses in Chang. So today Nathula is with us, while Jalipla is with the Chinese. In pursuit of the larger dharma, he was always unmindful of the other consequences, major and minor provocative actions that disturbed the safer status quo. Us samay, in 1967, in those tense times, what Sagat did in taking on the Chinese, वो सांप की पूंछ पर पैर रखने के समान था. But Sagat did precisely that. In pursuit of the larger good, Sagat did not refrain from acting, always unmindful, as I said, of the consequences. Even in Shillong, Sagat's spirit was indomitable, his resolve unbroken. He seized yet another opportunity that came his way, even in those backwaters, turning around the flow of events in the Mizo-insurgency very comprehensively. A similar propensity would punctuate his leadership years later during the arduous and critical dash to Dhaka. Even as the operational instructions from Headquarters Eastern Command to Sagat were explicit to secure the line up to the river Meghna and not go beyond, Sagat, I suspect, decided in his own mind that if he did get to the Meghna, he would cross. So on that fateful night, when Sagat began crossing the Meghna and his boss, Lieutenant General Jaggi Arora, queried Sagat as to why he was defying orders, General Sagat had this to say. Sir, he said, I am a corps commander. It is my job to exploit opportunities. I see opportunities beyond and I shall make the most of them. And he proceeded to cross the Meghna, a river 4 times broader than the river Rhine, thus giving the much needed fillip to the race for Dhaka. Now the moot point is this: did Sagat's defiance of orders tantamount to insubordination, or was such defiance a byproduct of deep strategic clarity and operational conviction? In Sagat's case, I suspect it was the latter, with both bad and good consequences. Nathula bad saw him being eased out to the backwater of the 101 comm zone, while the crossing of the Meghna good brought him success, glory, great name and fame. In sum, there is little doubt that Sagat was a leader with his own mind, as also one with a very rare spine. Were they Sam and Sagat merely lucky generals, as some seem to opine and suggest? Well, General Dave Petraeus, when queried similarly, famously quipped that in combat, luck was nothing but preparation meeting opportunity. Sam and Sagat may well have been lucky, but such luck piggybacked on a host of critical attributes to include years of careful preparation that helped them make the most of emergent opportunities. That is leadership. Good generalship, it is also said, is neither a skill set nor a collection of theories and strategies. It is nothing so formulaic. It is not a formula. It is largely about acquiring a discerning gaze to pick up early signs and distinctive moves, not the broad trends that everybody else sees. Smart generals sense the danger. They feel the opportunities. Sam and Sagat possessed such like attributes in abundant measure. Sagat, for instance, was an avid reader of professional journals. He always kept a discerning eye on new operational developments. He would never hesitate to convert as of yet emerging concepts into extant reality. So when heliborne operations as an operational concept was yet to be mooted and discussed in India's professional military colleges on sensing opportunity, Sagat, in concert with Group Captain Chandan Singh, put into effect the operational idea of heliborne operations in live operations, thus adding to the dash to Dhaka a much needed aerial flank. Similarly, risk-taking was a penchant which may well have begun early in their respective careers as amateur audacious moves. But through deep study and diligent practice, through various operational challenges, the duo honed risk-taking into a fine art that peaked in their stunning stewardship and execution of the dash to Dhaka. Operational clarity was yet another attribute which gave them great power and advantage over their subordinates, peers, and adversaries alike. And finally, good generalship and military leadership, in the ultimate analysis, are largely about the accumulation of practical, rooted combat wisdom, an elusive but fine quality which is then applied with judgment, moment by moment, to an unpredictable flow of situations, opportunities, challenges, and adversities. The original Kamdars, precisely perhaps because, at least in the case of Sagat, he rose from very humble beginnings. He was from the ranks. Even as these Kamdars zoomed to the top, they always remained rooted to the ground. Nazrein chahe unki asmaan par rahi hoon, पैर उनके हमेशा जमीन पर थे. If we were to reflect deeply, this is an attribute that separates the men from the boys, the truly distinguished from the merely competent, Sam and Sagat from the other leading lights of the time. So leaders like Sam and Sagat, ladies and gentlemen, will always be rare. Not paragons of virtue, but generals unique to their times and amongst India's greatest captains of war. In the end, a brief reference to Ambassador Dasgupta's observation in his recent book that it was not Manekshaw who dissuaded Prime Minister Indira Gandhi from launching operations early, but that she merely used him to greenlight a political decision that had already been made months earlier, may also be in order. Well, in my view, Manekshaw's professional military opinion expressed during that critical meeting in April 71 helped reinforce Mrs. Gandhi's predilection not to launch in a hurry. Her political hunch, her political judgment was fortified further by professional military opinion. And after a brief moment of tension between the two, when Indira Gandhi thought he was being impertinent, it turned into a deep conversation in which Sam outlined the many operational difficulties that the monsoons posed. He highlighted the threat from China till the passes closed, the time needed to redeploy equipment in the western borders, how the rivers in Bangladesh would be in spate, and why he did not want to get bogged down in an operational quagmire. He pointed out that he was aware of the strains posed on the Indian economy by the 20 million strong refugee influx, yet he asserted that he needed time to prepare in order that victory was assured. He also stated as how he would use the interregnum to initiate guerrilla operations in concert with the Mukti Bahini, which he did, thus laying the operational edifice for the larger conventional assault to follow. At a time when everybody was itching to go in, to include the BSF, I am told, under its very effervescent Director General K.F. Rustamji, the contrarian yet persuasive view expressed by Sam was brave, mature, and wise. The event and the conversations around the same have been recorded by several others, thus reinforcing their authenticity and veracity. To her credit, the Prime Minister heard her chief out, saw the wisdom in Manekshaw's position, and conquered. In consequence, the nation reaped the benefit in terms of one of our most comprehensive military victories in modern times. The interaction between Sam Manekshaw and Prime Minister Gandhi, in my view, reflect maturity in the politico-military relationship of the time. There was also perhaps a strong personal element in the same, one born of mutual regard and respect, a connect that began in Tejpur in 1962, which I spoke about, and blossomed over the years. It was mature and profound. To insinuate otherwise is less than fair. In the ultimate analysis, ladies and gentlemen, great leaders are intelligent souls, men and women of character and diligent workers, silent but resolute in the pursuit of their objectives. Sam Manekshaw and Sagat Singh did not pursue either fame or glory. They merely sought to resolutely achieve objectives assigned to them by life and the course of their careers. With diligence, enabled of course by their fulsome talents, greatness followed. खामोशी से बनाते रहो पहचान अपनी, हवाएं खुद तुम्हारा तराना गुनगुनाएंगी. With these words and thoughts, allow me to conclude. Thank you very much for a patient hearing. Jai Hind.